The police car's siren was the first thing that woke me up. Living in a small town, I was not used to hearing it in the dead of the night. I grumbled something not very pleasant towards our peacekeeping force, then tried to put myself back to sleep. Now, I was having a very vivid nightmare, so in a way it was a good thing that this patrol car took me out of it. Now, if I could try to dream about something pleasant... That's when I heard the siren a second time. This was unusual. Something was definitely happening in town. I thought I'd hear about it in school in the morning. A third car came down my street, but this time someone was talking in a large speaker. Hearing the tone of the man made me realize it was for sure not an advertising for an upcoming circus performance. I forced myself to wake up, took my head out of the pillow, and instinctively looked at my phone to check the time. It was 2:30 a.m., but that is not what caught my attention. I received a text from a two-digit number, 98. Probably something official. It said, "Follow military instructions. This is not an exercise. If you have firearms, take them. Take one flashlight per person minimum. Leave your house now. Stay close to light sources." What the hell did that mean? Was that some sort of joke? I've heard about some official alert message guy making a mistake in Hawaii. Maybe that was it. Some prank. I heard some helicopters flying above our town. Now that was what woke me up. Now this never happens. Our little valley town of about 23,000 inhabitants was not a place of trouble. We gave all the attention and problems to the city of Missoula, way south, beyond the Indian Reserve of Flatheads. I opened the window of my bedroom and saw that there was about a dozen helicopters in the air, some pointing flashlights towards the city as if looking for something, some landing in the parking around the town's casino. There was some noise outside my room. My parents were awake, and I saw the lights of the corridor flowing under my door. They were a bit on the paranoid side, wanting nothing else than a quiet life, and so we were already packing. I let go of a long yawn, watched a large military transport plane land in a small airport south of our house, and started to get dressed. 20 minutes later, we were in the streets. The night was still very dark, despite all those helicopters in the air. All the neighborhood was up and walking, following the police officers that were directing us to the mall. My dad tried to ask a couple of questions to the officer, but he was as confused as us. Apparently the police station got a call not long before us and had to hurry to get in gear and to take the police to the staging area from which we would be brought to the southern mall. There we would be safe. But safe from what? "Jonathan!" I turned around looking for the person calling my name. It was Sophie, a classmate that was also a neighbor. Apparently waking up was much harder for her than it had been for me, looking at her face. I made a joke about it that did not get the result I expected. She just yawned to my face, threw a casual insult, and went on with the conversation. "Do you know what is happening?" I shrugged and shook my head. "Nothing more than that weird text saying to stay in the light," I admitted. "Maybe something happened at the Canadian border? Maybe a terrorist attack? Maybe there..." I was interrupted when 4 military jets flew in at low altitude to right above us, going north at full speed. The sound was deafening, and I saw my mom along with many others protecting their ears with their hands. I tried to follow the lights of the planes with my eyes, but they disappeared not long after. Our city is in a valley going north/south, so if they were following it, it was easy to guess where they were going. A few smaller towns, and then the Canadian border. I felt my heart stop for a second when I heard detonations way up north. This was not an exercise, just as they said. These planes just bombed something. I looked at my parents with shocked opening eyes. "Are the Canadians invading?" I asked, not believing what was happening. But nobody could tell us anything. We just kept following the police officers. Military trucks were going up our suburban streets, and every time they came, we stepped on the side of the road to let them go. It was weird enough, but when combat transport vehicles started to go alongside regular tracks, people started to whisper, "Are we at war?" whispered a middle-aged lady, visibly frightened. My eyes caught Sophie, who was distraught. She was stepping away from her parents and seemed very nervous, with tears forming in her eyes. "What's up?" I asked her, trying to sound as casual and reassuring as possible in this crazy situation. "It's Margaret. She was spending the night at the casino with some friends." Margaret was Sophie's older sister. I did not really like her. She was too much of a wild party girl. Not that I want to sound like a boring suburban high schooler. So? She can join us directly at the mall. Isn't that right?" Sophie tried to make something with her mouth, then sort of looked like a smile. A tear went down her cheek. "I don't know. We tried to call her. Goes directly to voicemail. I heard someone say the military were using the casino as headquarters. Maybe she didn't go out in time. Maybe, I don't know. Oh my god." She started to cry and I hugged her. I tried to say a few good things to make her feel better, but I have never been good for this kind of thing. Hell, even my hug was not that great, since we needed to keep walking while hugging. "Listen, let's go there real quick. Pick her up and direct her to the mall. Deal?" She looked up at me with teary eyes. I could see the judgment in the eye. "Are you stupid? There are so many soldiers there." "So what?" I gave her a real smile, just as a couple of Apaches attack helicopters broke formation west from us and went north at great speed. "They're on our side. Plus, if there are so many soldiers, we'll be safe there too." It was not a great plan, but I really thought it would be fine. In the worst case, they could catch us and send us on the way to the mall. We were kids after all, right? It would not take a lot of time. I asked a neighborhood friend to tell my parents I would go with Sophie quickly, pick up her sister, and that we'll all meet at the mall. If I told him directly, my dad would just catch me and carry on his back to make sure I'd stay with them. The large group of neighbors arrived at a military checkpoint. Soldiers were there, taking command from the police officers. Everyone was given a distress flare and military-grade flashlights by soldiers. And then we got inside of a truck, headed directly to the southern mall, I guessed. One thing did catch my attention. One of the soldiers at the checkpoint was not in regular army camouflage. He had a black and red uniform that seemed more high-tech to my unexperienced eye. I mean, I kinda like to know the name of military hardwares, but I don't know much about uniforms. The man was there, standing on a Humvee, giving orders around, making sure that everyone got a flare and embarked in the trucks. The crowd started to mass in front of the checkpoint. That was our chance. "Let's cut through the Robinson's garden to get around the army." Sophie looked at me as I was saying my stupid plan. "From there we can go straight to the casino." And that's exactly what we did. Away from the group, we plunged into the dark of the suburban gardens. To the distant north, more explosions came. I looked into the skies and saw nothing except a very pale moon and some black clouds. The skies were pitch black. Some funky lights were coming from the valley up north. Was that like the result of some bombing or some weird thunder? "Don't you feel it's cold?" asked Sophie. I did not pay attention until now because of the adrenaline, but yes, it was freezing. Much more than what was usual for such a summer night. "Yeah, I feel it. Plus the damn wind won't stop blowing. It's not even going in the..." I stopped instantly. I realized something that froze the blood in my veins. In our town, the airport was a big source of jobs, and I wanted to be an air controller. Lots of useless trivia I knew about our airport. One of them, it was built to follow the wind in order to help pilots take off with the wind in their back. And that wind was always coming from the north, going south. But not tonight. The wind is blowing north. It just won't stop blowing. Sophie stared at me with round eyes. I could read the incomprehension on her face. It never happened, I whispered while shrugging. If you try to scare me, Jonathan, let's just turn on the lights. Sophie was taking her flashlight out of her pocket and I pushed away quickly. No, the soldiers will see us. We need to not make any noise. A huge rumble came up from our left on Main Street. We both crouched and tried to see from behind the fence we were hiding behind. A column of Abrams battle tanks were going north at great speed towards the casino. The whole goddamn army was deploying in our town. I was about to offer to maybe go to the mall when Sophie started moving again. Okay, let's hurry. I don't want to stay here a minute more than what is necessary. We walked 10 more minutes. Fighter jets kept going north to bomb God knows what. More and more troops arrived, be it by helicopters, transport planes, or coming up from Route 93. I was acting tough in front of Sophie, but in truth it was terrifying. I swear I saw the shadows of a couple kids while we were crossing the gardens. They were going straight to the east, probably also looking for a way inside the casino. Maybe Margaret's friends? They did not see us, moving fast away from us. I would have called them out if I was not so frightened to be heard by the patrolling soldiers around us. Our terror switched to stupefaction once we arrived at the casino. The entire casino had been turned into a fortress. Defensive positions had been erected, snipers were on the roofs, tanks were in the parking lot, everyone was looking north. On the roof of the casino's huge light projectors were being installed. I don't know the exact name of these things, but you know the thing that's used for the bat signal? That sort of thing. Hiding in a backyard, we tried to look for a way in. We failed. Soldiers were patrolling everywhere. With the helicopters not high above, it was difficult to hear what any of them were saying. Most of them seemed confused, scared even. I guess that they did not know either what to expect, or at least not completely. Most of them looked very nervous, and I did not want to risk them reflex shooting us because we were trying to sneak in their backs. A squad of 4 black and red soldiers came not far from us. Some advanced uniform was the one coordinating the evacuation effects. They also seemed stressed, but were staying away from the bulk of the troops. I made a sign to Sophie to stay silent, and then tried to focus to hear what they were saying. "Any refugees coming from the north?" asked a first soldier to their squad leader. To my surprise, he had a strong foreign accent that I sort of recognized as East European. "None. They couldn't run away in time," said the man leading the unit in a cold, harsh tone, before pointing to the roof of the house to our right. "Put Karl, Mikhail, and Frederick up there. If HQ fails, they'll cover the retreat. Any news from Tomoharo's unit?" The whole group stopped, not 5 feet from our position. We were standing in a bush behind a fence, still as a shadow, holding our breaths. "The fences at the Walmart are up," said a man carrying a large computer-looking device on his back, connected to his helmet through wires. He'll try to delay them, but that won't make us gain much time. Silence fell for a few seconds before the 4th soldier, a woman with a Texan accent, asked, "Why are we setting up here? It's not a great defensive position." "First, we don't question orders, you know this," answered immediately the squad leader. "And second, this is the last town before the valley opens up. The last bottleneck before these things can get out of the valley and spread to the flatlands. We have to hold the line until the other households have regrouped and counterattacked." More seconds of heavy silence. I couldn't hold my breath anymore and started breathing as discreetly as I could. The squad of black and red soldiers started to move away. "We just have to hold the night? They'll be weaker in the daylight, right?" asked the man that was previously worried about refugees. "If they can close the rift. Otherwise, dawn will never rise again on this region." They kept talking while walking the outskirts of the casino fortress. A series of powerful explosions rang from the north. This time it was much closer to our city. It jump-scared me like thunder. gunfight erupted in what I knew was the direction of the Walmart, north of the city. It sounded like a huge firefight, or it was just a lot of soldiers are shooting at something. The helicopters above us broke formation, taking altitude while launching volleys of rocket towards an unknown enemy. The fighter jets were now dropping bombs not 20 kilometers away from us. Even though we were not that close, we felt the aftershock and the heat waves. Something unlike anything I've ever felt before. Let's go to the sewers, I offered. We'll be safe there, and we can reach the casino that way. I am not going in the sewers, shouted back Sophie. No way. Absolutely no way. A rain of huge rockets flew through our heads from way south, headed straight into the valley in the north. Way on the left, I saw the shape of a huge twin-rotored helicopter getting away from the combat zone. He was spiraling out of control. I did not see what was causing that, but after 10 seconds of spiraling fast, he just plummeted to the ground. Screams started to rise from beyond the casino as firefights erupted everywhere. This whole place is turning into a war zone, I said to Sophie. I'm all up for not going into this fortress, but at least let's take the sewers to get away. It'll be way faster. I've seen it in movies. Sophie was utterly terrified. She did not know what to do. I could guess she still wanted to save her sister, or join her parents, or mine, or anything. I just wanted to get the hell away from whatever it was coming, like out of town. Let's wait a few minutes, she offered. Maybe it will calm down, like maybe they'll win. We waited for about 10 minutes. The battle was now in full swing. I did not know what was going on. We went a few streets south from the casino, hidden in another backyard. Not far from where we could access the sewer. It was like being in the middle of a huge fireworks show, except the fireworks were 1,000 times louder. However, it was not bright at all. If not for the sound and shock waves, we would have thought the town was peaceful. I took the opportunity of having a bit of time to write everything on my social media. More helicopters crashed all over town as more convoys of troops and vehicles arrived, deploying their infantry in the streets around us, before heading into the fighting in combat formation. We were staying hidden as all of this happened. The winds started to grow ever stronger, and the light of the moon was getting paler and paler, until we could barely see anything apart from the explosions. The light was going away somehow. Even the screen from my phone seemed dimmed, as if critically out of battery. Incoming, take positions. I heard one of the soldiers not far from us shout to his men. Then it hit us. Cold grasped my body as the lights of the street went out. In an instant, I could not see anything more than 10 meters away, except the dimmed flashes of the soldiers' weapons firing. Sophie looked at me with utter terror in her eyes. I took out the flashlight from my pocket and turned it on. It barely helped, but at least it was something. I saw something moving not too far to my right, and pointed the light towards it. It was nothing, just shadows dancing with shadows. Far to my left, the soldiers were screaming. Screams of horror and pain. Whatever was happening, they were definitely losing. I kept praying that somehow our army would turn this battle around, that this, whatever it was not the end of the world, that we would survive this. What I did not know at this moment was that the mission to stop this nightmare had already happened, that it was led by an elite force beyond my imagination, and that they had already failed. Okay, said Sophie, crying, let's try the sewers. We waited 2 additional minutes that the firefight around us got less intense before going for it. Then we heard an inhuman howl, something almost insectoid and rocky. It sounded like as if it came from the other side of an auditorium, echoing beyond us and then back. Let's go, I shouted to Sophie, taking her hands as we were running towards the sewer entrance, ready to enter the darkness below. I've recently moved back to my hometown. It's a small seaside town in the UK, and you've almost definitely never heard of it. I left to study art at university, which in the blink of an eye became 10 years working in the art world in the city. My life was fast-paced, full of parties and social gatherings, and I had real potential to make it big. I decided to come home when an old friend of mine had died. He was the third to pass away in the space of 6 months. The four of us had been the closest group imaginable growing up, spending our entire childhood and teenage years together. The news of his death devastated me. So much so that I felt that I had to come home, not just for a visit, but for as long as it took to work out why my friends were gone. Had left everything behind. My friends and I were not so well behaved growing up. We often caused problems, were disrespectful to everyone, and generally had a nuisance to the local residents. So when my parents told me that two had succumbed to addiction and the other had a heart attack during a bar fight, it didn't surprise me that no one in town batted an eyelid. My friends took seriously different paths to mine. We hadn't been in contact regularly for years, but we'd shared a trauma in our teenage years, something that made us feel that these deaths were not a tragic coincidence. Darren was my closest friend. He was the most recent to die and was the supposed heart attack. When we were young, he used to tease me because my parents named me Liza after Liza Minnelli. He would throw jazz hands whenever he saw me. It made me smile to think about. Darren was sweet and kind and incredibly loyal to his friends. I'm not telling you this because it's relevant. I'm telling you this because I know there will never be another positive account of his life. Darren always had a lot of problems, more so than all the rest of us. He had already embarked on a turbulent life journey when I left for uni, getting into drugs and dealing them and spending anything he earned at the pub. There wasn't a Friday night that he wasn't fighting someone random. I think he did it to numb the pain. I ran away. Darren drank and snorted. Baz was different. I had hoped some of twisted hope that he would be okay. I was wrong. He was the most gentle and sensitive of the group. He adored his girlfriend Lacey, and despite everything we went through, he seemed to cope pretty well. After 2 years after I left, he broke up with Lacey, lost his home, she wouldn't let him see his 18-month-old son, and he turned to drugs too. Over the years, it had only gotten worse. There's not much else to do where we're from. Unfortunately, Baz died 3 months ago. He was found seized up in a squat and had likely been there for days. Heroin. It was sad, but expected. Especially after the sad loss of our friend Tyler to the same awful addiction. Tyler went first, 6 months ago. When it happened, my parents broke the news to me over the phone. I was attending a cocktail party hosted up by an up-and-coming artist launching a new collection. The harsh reality that I had been slipping martini while someone I loved foamed at the mouth in a cold, dark alleyway hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt incredibly guilty that I hadn't been there, that I haven't called or kept in touch. I came home briefly to attend the funeral. The look on Tyler's 5-year-old daughter's face broke my heart. I had never met her before, but she was the cutest kid I'd ever seen. The old Tyler would have been so proud. Guests spoke to me about the shock, how he had been doing better recently. His funeral was the last time I saw Baz or Darren. It was like a morbid school reunion. Darren didn't look too good. He was angry and he had already drunk too much when I arrived. He took it out on me because he always felt I abandoned him for university. I couldn't argue because I suppose he was right. When I arrived, Darren started screaming at me immediately, ranting about how I left them, and if I had stayed then Tyler wouldn't be dead. Saying that it was all a lie and Tyler had been clean for months, that there was no way he had overdosed. It all cut pretty deep. Baz tried to hold him back, but I could see he didn't know what to say to me either. I figured it was the grief and the whiskey I could smell on his breath talking. Of course, Tyler had overdosed. His whole life was headed that way. I truly believed that until he said something that made my blood run cold. Do you know where he died? It was a simple question. One most people will find benign, if not a little dark, given the situation. But to me it was huge. I knew the answer already, purely because he had asked that question. It was the whole reason I begged and pleaded within the university to let me in. My grades were terrible, but I was passionate about art. It took night courses and resitting exams, but I made it. All to escape this town, that place. When we were about 16, we found a place we called The Wall. It wasn't anything fancy and we weren't too creative. It was just what it was. A wall. At the back of an old closed down industrial estate with a nearby alley to access it. The same alleyway Tyler had died in. At the time, we had just started smoking weed and we had hung out there to drink and smoke without being bothered or caught. The industrial estate was always quiet. There were never any homeless people, junkies, or other kids there, and you could sit for hours and not see another soul. It was perfect. In retrospect, maybe I should have seen it as a red flag. The wall was covered in the most beautiful street art I've ever seen. Colors and compositions you couldn't imagine. Bright tones and line work in all different styles that flow together like a living organism. I don't say this lightly, especially within my career, but it was nothing short of a masterpiece. After a smoke, I would get lost in it, transported into a world of color and light. I spent hours just watching it, observing every pattern and color that made up the intricate mural. Every square inch of it was imprinted into my mind. There were no tags or standard sprayed graffiti to be found anywhere on the wall. The texture was that of an oil painting, dust-proof and fresh-looking. I don't know how long it had been there, but even in the time we'd spent hanging out there, it should have aged a lot. But every day it looked like as if it had just been painted. The boys weren't as visibly fascinated as I was, but they were vocal about their appreciation. Baz more so than the others, but he was always a sensitive soul, anyways. They would sometimes kick a football up against it, lean on it and clap their shoes against it to get the sand out if we had come from the beach. I cringed like the brickwork or the Mona Lisa itself every time, but I never let it show. They were careful to do no damage though, whereas usually they wouldn't have cared at all. After we'd spent a year or so in our new hangout, we stopped going anywhere else. We met there daily, after school and at the weekends. It was the best time of our lives. Then one day it all changed. We'd had a rough day at school. Darren had gotten in trouble for getting in a fight with another student and threatening a teacher. He'd gotten violent with the other student and was facing permanent expulsion. He never intended to go to university, but he had at least wanted to make it through 6th form. We'd gone directly to the wall to hang out before we had to go home, and then Darren would have to face his violent, alcoholic father. He was fuming and still ranting about the earlier incidents. We were trying to calm him down. This wasn't really anything new. We were those kids, but this time was particularly bad. Cause Tyler has always been a quieter one, but for some reason that day he couldn't cope with Darren's ranting. He got angry himself and told Darren to shut up. He must have predicted the fist coming toward him, because he ducked in perfect timing for Darren to full pelt punch the wall. The beautiful wall. It wasn't hard enough to damage Brick. He wasn't really that tough, but it was enough to shatter Darren's hand. He broke a lot of bones that day. Tyler apologized profusely, but although I doubt he would have apologized if a punch that hard landed. He was lucky that Darren was in too much pain to care about why he was angry with him in the first place. Tyler was always too scared to bother challenging Darren, So it was odd that he had in the first place, and he didn't dare call him out on the overreaction to a simple shut up. I know you probably can't understand why we were friends with Darren or why we stuck around, but we knew that he had issues. He was never usually violent with any of us, he was just a product of his environment. We tried to help him and called an ambulance. He was calm for a while, but as the swelling built alongside the pain, Darren reacted the only way he knew how to in almost any stressful situation. He got angry again. He grabbed hold of Baz's bike, holding most of the weight with his good hand, but still putting far too much pressure on the bad one. Pure rage had cut through the pain, and he smashed the bike against the wall. Baz tried to protest, but the red mist had already taken over. He struck it repeatedly until part of the beautiful paintwork crumbled off. Although the painting previously looked eternally new, the wall itself was old. It wasn't long before cracks appeared, chunks of decades-old brick fell into the floor, and the mural was ruined. The abstract colors and paintings were interrupted and distorted. My heart shattered. As an art nerd, it was as if someone had taken a blowtorch to Picasso. When the paramedics arrived, I refused Darren's pleas to get into the ambulance with him. He took Baz, and Tyler cycled Baz's mangled bike behind him. I stayed with the wall. I tried to push crumbled bits of brick back in and rebuild the painting like a puzzle, but I couldn't. I ignored every phone call from the boys and just stared in disbelief at the desecrated remains of the masterpiece. Then I saw him. A man standing no more than 20 meters away from me in the wall, but the next unit in an industrial estate. It wouldn't seem much to most people, it wouldn't to me usually, but in that moment I realized that, aside from the paramedics that would have come to collect Darren, I never had seen another human being here. I'm not sure what have baffled me more, the realization itself, or the realization I had never thought about it before. Sure, we'd often praise the fact that no one was around, it suited us just fine, but until I saw him I hadn't understood just how strange it was that we'd never seen a single person, like ever. I stared at him, and he stared back at me with unblinking eyes. He was just close enough and it was just light enough that I could see him perfectly. They were a grey-blue color and had a sad intensity I had never seen before. He was thin, with long skinny limbs and a gaunt face, almost like someone had been taking medication for a long time. He wore a dark grey hoodie, done up like Kenny from South Park. All that I could see were those eyes and the sunken cheeks. Even his hands were covered by the long sleeves. I was terrified. Something about this man really unnerved me, and I still hadn't seen him blink. Then he walked toward me. My heart skipped multiple beats as it fell from my mouth to my chest. When it restarted, it pounded. The hairs on my arms and the back of my neck danced, tickling a little as they all stood up, and I still couldn't move. It didn't take long until he stood right in front of me, still staring at me with those eyes. He stopped inches from my face for a minute or two before continuing to stand face on with the wall and the large crumbled chunk. I watched in horror and devastation as a single tear ran through his cheek and he raised his arm to reveal a disgusting sight. His fingers had twisted and lengthened, knotting in places to create a long, thin mass of flesh. It was both elegant and sickening. From the end of the fleshy mass sprouted hairs, short and fine, growing from the slightly blooded tips of the finger, massing to a delicate point. His hand was the most horrifically beautiful paintbrush I had ever seen. This was the artist I had longed to meet. My idol, the creator of my obsession, stood right in front of me, and I had never been more terrified. I don't know if sheer admiration prohibited me from moving, but I just watched. The unnatural deformity of the hand just didn't bother me like it should a normal person. His demeanor and silence alone should have sent me running, but it didn't. As the hairs on the end of his brush came closer to the wall, more tears fell from his gaunt face. They dropped onto the crumbled remains of his art. He reached out to his other arm and I braced myself for another perplexing sight. But his other hand was like any human's. It was incredibly slim. The bones and veins created ramps and bumps across the skin. But other than malnourishment, his hand was normal. He took his semi-normal hand and laid his palm flat against the wall, his paintbrush hand hovering over the most damaged part of the art. He opened his mouth wide, pushing the hoodie open just enough to reveal his whole sunken face. I cringed, expecting an ear-shattering scream, but no sound ever came. The scream was written all over his face even without noise. It wasn't a scream of anger. It was a scream of unimaginable pain. I can only liken it to the expression you'd see on parents that lost children in the news. He was grieving for his artwork, for his entire soul. For the first time I was able to utter a word. Sorry was all I could manage. I was simultaneously in complete admiration and in terror all at once. He didn't break eye contact with the wall at first, but my word disrupted him. His paintbrush remained in the gap where the crumpled pieces of the wall had been. He turned his back and faced me again, not moving either of his hands, despite me being a little too far from him for your average person to look at. It was like he had the neck of an owl. He didn't say a word, just continued to cry and scream in complete silence. I couldn't hear any birds or cars. Nothing but silence. Come to think of it, my story might have been the only sound since he first appeared. And after all these years, I'm not even certain that was audible. I felt his body shake as he began to look at me. Tears that began to roll down my cheeks, not for myself, but for the artwork. I could feel every ounce of his pain. I focused on nothing but him for at least a minute. The pain was so intense I could barely breathe. My eyes were clouded, and as I turned to look at the ruined painting, it had already been restored. His paintbrush had retracted into his sleeve, only a small brush tip emerging. There were no crumpled remains of anything left. It was like the incident hadn't happened. The beautiful painting was exactly as it should be. The colors, composition, and line work was as they had never been touched. This wasn't a repaint, it was a complete restoration of the original. I had never in my years come across skill or art like it. I looked at the man in awe. Now stood proudly in front of his painting. By this point he looked skeletal. His gaunt cheeks sucked in even further, and his ribs almost visible through the baggy hoodie. He was so thin that his eyes bulged from their sockets. The painting had taken a part of him with it. His entire being poured into one piece. The dedication was incredible. He looked at me in the eyes again, his body turning to face me along with his neck this time. He reached out and traced his paintbrush along my cheek, leaving a burning pain in its trail. He spoke only once, and his words had never left me. Art is obsession. The art we obsess over is to be respected. You and your friends are no longer welcome here, but that will not stop the obsession. You'll all find obsessions in your lives, but if you return to mine, your lives will end. He walked away after that, disappearing behind the building I had first spotted him by. I tried to follow him, to answer or find out what he meant, but he didn't stop, and by the time I reached the building, he was gone. I never saw the artist again. I turned to admire the artwork one more time, to revel in those beautiful colors, but it had changed. Written across it in beautiful lettering was a warning to me and my friends. Leave or die. It had appeared impossibly fast. I knew very quickly it was time to go. Before I ran from the wall, I took a picture of the mural from my phone. It was a flip phone and one of the first with a camera, but the message was unmistakable. This despite the fact it had captured nothing of the artwork itself. The exposure seemed so high. But I knew the art was not meant to be viewed. It was creator's obsession alone. When I opened my phone, I had tons of missed calls from all three boys. I called Darren back first. He was still in the hospital, having his hand put in the cast. As I held the phone to my face, I noticed blood streaming from the cheek the paintbrush had touched. I babbled a lot on the phone. Darren went nuts at first, thinking I had been attacked. I convinced him to get everyone to meet us at Tyler's home. His parents were the only ones okay with us all there. When I met up with them, it took a long time to get him to calm down about the cut in my face and the general disheveled way I was presenting. I told them my story, begged them to listen. At first they thought I was crazy, but who wouldn't? After a while, I reached for my phone and showed them the photo, and after that they begun to listen. I don't know if they ever truly believed my story, but the message in the phone and my distress was enough to keep us away from the wall for good. To Darren's disgust, I had ran away to university not long after that. I tried to forget about everything, but as much as I hate to admit it, I still irrationally yearned for the painting. I know the boys did too. They never admitted it, or spoke about it as much, but I could see it in their eyes. Sometimes when I looked at them, I could see the colors and the patterns of the walls dancing around their pupils. The artist was right. They acquired other obsessions. We all did. Baz and Tyler had drugs, Darren was fighting, and I had finding a piece that inspired me even an ounce of what his had. But over the years, that initial obsession never waned. If anything, it just became harder to suppress. I was glad to be away from it. Now I think our vices only ever really masked it. I think we were all suffering without it. I had seen the artist's eyes every night in my dreams. It intensified when Tyler died. He should never have gone back, but he did. All the drugs must have destroyed his will. I don't know if he ever made it into the wall. He was found in the alleyway nearby, but we all knew why he was in that area. I imagine if he had made it, he had never been found at all. Since then, the deaths have happened, and this is why I've returned. Baz and Darren weren't found anywhere near it, but it seems too much of a coincidence for them to pass so soon as after Tyler. I could see the pain in their eyes at the funeral, just like the artist's pain. I know something isn't right. I can feel it. It's that feeling that brought me home. The same feeling that will guide me back to the wall tonight. The scar on my cheek throbbing. I want answers, even if I'm never able to share them.